In 1977, in a quiet suburb of Enfield, England, the Hodgson family began experiencing something they could never explain. What started as small disturbances soon became one of the most terrifying poltergeist cases in history. It all started with strange noises, knocks and scratches echoing through the walls at night. 11-year-old Janet and her younger brother Johnny were the first to notice. Then furniture began to move on its own. A dresser slid across the room without explanation. The children ran to their mother in terror. Their mother, Peggy, didn't believe them at first. She thought they were imagining things until she saw the furniture move with her own eyes. Terrified, Peggy called the police, hoping for a rational explanation. What they encountered would leave them speechless. A police officer who arrived at the scene reported witnessing a chair lift off the ground and move on its own. But there was nothing they could do. As word spread, the press descended on the Hodgson home. Photographers and journalists arrived in droves, eager to capture every moment of the bizarre happenings. Soon, the family's nightmare was splashed across every newspaper in the country. But while the world watched, the terror only grew. Paranormal researchers Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair arrived, determined to document the strange occurrences. What they found was horrifying. Janet, the 11-year-old girl, began speaking in a deep, guttural voice, claiming to be an old man named Bill Wilkins. The voice recordings remain chilling to this day. Objects would fly across the room violently. The investigators themselves witnessed items being thrown by an unseen force. One night, Janet was lifted from her bed by an unseen force. Her terrified siblings watched as she floated in midair. Strange scratches and bruises began appearing on Janet's body. No one knew how they got there. As the haunting grew more intense, a dark and shifting shadow seemed to follow Janet. It would appear at night, lingering over her bed, its form constantly changing. There was no escaping the presence that filled the room with fear. One night, the poltergeist power became uncontrollable. Janet was dragged across the room by an invisible force. Her body jerked and pulled as though someone was trying to break her. Her terrified siblings could only watch in horror, helpless to stop the nightmare. Priests were called in to perform an exorcism, hoping to rid the house of the evil spirit that tormented the family. But the entity only grew angrier. Objects flew across the room, and the house seemed to fight back against every attempt at salvation. Strange growling noises filled the air, as if something monstrous was hiding within the walls. The growls were low and menacing, coming from the depths of the house. Investigators recorded these sounds, but no one could explain their origin. The furniture began to shift again, moving by itself. Heavy chairs slid across the floor, and bookshelves rattled, as though an invisible hand was rearranging the room. It wasn't just moving furniture. It was a violent force of nature wreaking havoc on their home. The investigators themselves weren't safe. Objects began to target them. Chairs and tables would fly across the room, almost as if the spirit was angry at their intrusion. Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair were not prepared for the violent force that awaited them. Janet's transformation was perhaps the most unsettling of all. Her eyes grew vacant, her behavior strange and erratic. She would fall into trances, and when she spoke, it was no longer her voice. Something far older and more sinister had taken over her body. One night, things escalated beyond belief. Janet was lifted from her bed, her body completely rigid, hovering several feet above the floor. Her siblings screamed in terror as they watched their sister float in the air, held by some unseen force. As the entity's rage continued to grow, destruction followed. Lamps were shattered, glass flew across the room, and walls cracked under the force of unseen hands. The house had become a battleground between the living and something far darker. The deep, unnatural voice that spoke through Janet wasn't just the voice of an old man. It began to speak in other languages, in tones that sent chills down the spine. Some of the recordings still have experts baffled, unable to explain how such a transformation could occur. The poltergeist had no intention of letting the investigators leave unscathed. Books, furniture, and objects were hurled at them with terrifying force. Every attempt to document the supernatural events only seemed to make the spirit angrier. The family began to feel the entity's physical presence. The air would grow thick, and a misty fog would appear, as if the spirit was trying to manifest itself fully. It wasn't just haunting their home, It was infiltrating every inch of their lives. At night, the doors and windows would slam shut on their own, rattling with the intensity of a storm. The family was trapped inside, with no escape from the malevolent force that surrounded them. Janet's screams echoed throughout the house. They weren't just screams of fear, they were screams of torment. Something or someone was controlling her every movement, forcing her to endure unimaginable suffering. The entity began taunting the family, flipping furniture over and cracking mirrors. In the dead of night, disembodied laughter filled the house, a mocking sound that only deepened the terror. In the final days of the haunting, Janet claimed to see the spirit of Bill Wilkins himself. "This is my house," he growled before disappearing forever. In the end, the family was left shattered. After several months, the haunting seemed to cease, but the scars would remain, both physical and emotional. To this day, the true nature of the Enfield Poltergeist remains a mystery. Was it a hoax, a malevolent spirit, or something more terrifying? The unanswered questions continue to haunt those who witnessed the events.